June 13th, 2003. It's a hot Friday evening in Prince George's County, Maryland, a sprawling suburb on the edge of Washington, D.C.
It's a fairly urban area. There's about 1 million people in Prince George's County.
At 6 p.m., many of the commuters are heading home after working in the nation's capital.
Lots of federal government workers lived in the suburbs of Prince George's County.
It's more family-oriented and has more of a small-town feel.
By 7 o'clock, one federal employee, Latoya Taylor, hasn't made it home yet.
Hello?
And her mother receives a troubling phone call.
What?
It was the daycare, and they were calling and saying, Latoya's late. She needs to pick the kids up.
I understand. Let me try to call her.
That immediately set off alarm bells. Latoya would never leave her children at daycare.
She's always there, and if she can't be there, she always makes arrangements for somebody to get her children.
Not even kind of just sending my mother a message going, hey, I'm gonna be late, or what have you, nothing. It was just very out of place.
Latoya's mother tries repeatedly to contact her daughter.
And it went to voicemail. So I called it again. And I'm like, Latoya, where are you?
Baby, if you get this, give me a call. Let me know that you're okay. I'm gonna go and pick up the kids now.
No one had heard from her. All of a sudden, Latoya was missing.
26-year-old Latoya Taylor was a hardworking single mother who came from a tradition of government service.
Her mom was a police officer, so there was always police officer friends around, and it was just a lifestyle that she was accustomed to being around, and she enjoyed it.
She started clerical when she first started working for the federal government. And then as she saw other job openings, she decided that she wanted to go after those positions.
It was important for Latoya to be independent. She wanted to be able to handle her life her own way and take care of her business. And that's exactly what Latoya did.
After years of clerical work, Latoya had landed an administrative job with the Internal Revenue Service.
The IRS doesn't hire just anyone. They make sure they vet every employee. And for Latoya to have passed every interview, every application process was a big deal.
She definitely wanted to be well off and have a life that she would feel comfortable for herself and her children.
By 1998, Latoya was a proud mother of 2. And while the relationships with her children's fathers hadn't worked out, she was determined to give her kids everything.
Everything she did was just in an effort to take care of her kids. She loved her children very much, would do anything for her kids. She was just a great mom.
She did her best to raise them and take care of them.
But she wouldn't have to do it alone forever. In the fall of 1999, Latoya reconnected with an old flame from high school, 24-year-old Issa Santiago, and quickly fell in love.
Latoya and Issa rekindled the flame, and sparks flew. Issa was tall, Issa was handsome, he was charming.
However, it wasn't just Issa's looks that attracted Latoya.
He would come over and he would help her with the kids, and she loved that about him, but she was in love with him. She was very much in love with him.
There was definitely passion in the relationship that the two of them had together. They definitely had a fiery relationship.
Ever since they were in high school, there was something about Issa that kept Latoya coming back for more.
The couple's bond seemed solidified when Latoya and Issa welcomed a child of their own.
In September 2002, they had a baby girl. She was beautiful. Issa and Latoya were proud parents.
Even with a newborn, Issa and Latoya never took the next step in their relationship and lived separately while raising their daughter. and continuing their romance. While the situation came with challenges, it seemed to work for the couple.
LaToya and Issa was just this bond that no one else could understand.
They still wanted to be together, but just not every day.
Is she asleep?
From LaToya's perspective, she loved Issa, but she was not about to allow herself to be dependent on a man.
She was one of the first of her friends to have her own home.
LaToya was doing just fine. She didn't need to cohabitate to co-parent.
That's just the type of person she was. Able to work on her own and not worry about anybody helping her.
I gotta go.
Okay.
And while LaToya didn't worry about needing the help, Issa also wanted to provide for his daughter.
He was there. He was willing to contribute financially. Even though LaToya managed on her own, she's not going to turn down child support.
He was paying money underneath the table, if you will, not pursuant to a court order. He was giving LaToya money for diapers and help with daycare expenses.
They seemed to have this oddly yet unique family.
But on the evening of June 13th, 2003, this family would be ripped apart by a distressing phone call.
She didn't make it home to get her kids. They don't want me involved with the investigation because I am the mother of the missing person. That would compromise things. And if they had wanted me involved, I couldn't have helped them. I really couldn't help them. I was a zombie walking around. I just could not believe that LaToya went missing.
In June of 2003, 26-year-old LaToya Taylor appeared to be on the fast track to success.
She was doing very well. She had her job with the IRS. She had her own place. She was raising her kids and just being a great mom.
But on the evening of June 13th, the devoted mother of three failed to pick up her kids from daycare.
Hello?
The daycare called her mom. And that's when it just started to go downhill.
What?
I'm like, something's got to be terribly wrong. LaToya would never not come and get her kids.
During the drive to pick up LaToya's children from daycare, her mother, herself an officer with Prince George's County PD, calls her commanding officer.
Her mother actually was a Prince George's County police officer at the time, so she knew the proper procedures to get the resources going.
Yes. Could you go ahead and get that started for me?
And I told my sergeant that I need someone to run by the subway station and check for her car.
What her fellow officers find confirms her worst fears.
They got to the subway and they saw a car there. Once they found the car, I knew that was it. Something was wrong.
Prince George's County Police open a formal investigation into LaToya's disappearance.
At that point, it's like a race of time to find out what happened to her and where she at.
Detectives' first move is to review the security footage from the IRS building where LaToya worked.
It was a federal building. There were cameras everywhere.
The surveillance footage from the IRS shows LaToya leaving the building.
She starts angling over to the left, and unfortunately, there's a truck in the way. After a few seconds, this truck pulls off, and then you see this Jeep Cherokee. You do not see her get in the Jeep on video.
However, when the truck drives away, there's no sign of LaToya anywhere in the parking lot.
That was that. That was where the trail ended. Investigators know they need to find that Jeep.
Unfortunately, the surveillance video gives them little in the way of clues.
We tried to run down the Jeep Cherokee itself, but the video did not give a license plate.
As night falls, detectives track down one of LaToya's friends from work.
They interviewed a friend of LaToya Taylor's, found out what was going on.
Anything unusual or out of the ordinary happened with LaToya today? Not really.
According to this friend, Friday had started out like any other day.
She got in there on time. She was working up until around 1 o'clock when she was going to take her lunch, which was normal.
Then at lunchtime, LaToya's routine suddenly changed.
She canceled lunch that she would regularly do with her coworkers, and she left that day.
She said she had to go get money.
She said she was going to the bank or an ATM.
She didn't really say. She just left, and that was the last time I saw her.
With the security footage and LaToya's coworker an apparent dead end, detectives reach out to LaToya's mother.
They came out to my house. They just started trying to take reports, just trying to track her steps.
I'm sorry, ma'am. We're doing everything we can.
I know. It's still hard.
We found surveillance footage of her leaving work, possibly getting into a Jeep.
I don't know of anyone who owns one.
Detectives knew they had to ask tough questions, but they needed to know if one of LaToya's exes would have wanted to harm her, maybe out of jealousy.
LaToya's children's fathers would never have harmed a hair on her body.
Is there anyone else in her life we should talk to?
Isa Santiago, that's her boyfriend.
Are they living together?
No, their setup is very unusual.
Unusual how so?
LaToya was fiercely independent. She wasn't in a hurry to have Issa move into her space, into her home, which she earned on her own. Detectives knew they needed to speak with him.
Here's his number. Find my daughter.
We will.
On Saturday, June 14th, detectives contact the father of LaToya's 9-month-old daughter and ask him to come in for an interview.
When a woman goes missing, the first person the police are going to look at are the males that are closest to her.
He's her boyfriend. They just had a baby together. Issa is the closest man to LaToya at this point.
That afternoon, Issa Santiago arrives at the station and sits down with detectives.
All right, thanks for coming in to talk to us, Mr. Santiago.
No problem. Have you guys heard anything about Toya yet? Her mom called me.
He's just as concerned as everybody else that she's missing.
He told investigators he would do anything to help find where LaToya was.
Now, when was the last time you saw LaToya?
Last weekend. I went over to see my baby girl.
And have you spoke to her since then?
Yesterday morning. Called at work.
Issa had just spoken to LaToya on the phone, and everything seemed normal. Everything was fine.
And did she say anything about lunch plans?
No. We just talked about our daughter. I was supposed to go see her this Sunday.
So we and LaToya get along?
Of course we do.
He says they was on good terms. Everything is fine with them. You know, there's no problem with him and Toya.
But you don't live together?
No, we don't.
Why is that?
It's a little complicated.
Tell us about it.
What Issa tells detectives next adds an explosive new angle to the case.
Investigators are shocked to find out that Issa is actually married.
He also had this other life as well.
And now detectives wanted to know, did the love triangle have anything to do with LaToya's disappearance?
Hi, excuse me?
Detectives investigating LaToya Taylor's disappearance have just uncovered the shocking truth about her relationship with Issa Santiago.
In addition to being the father of LaToya's 9-month-old daughter, Issa was also married to another woman.
As he described it, there was a bit of a love triangle going on between the three of them.
Look, I didn't mean for it to happen that way. It just did.
The dating relationship between Issa and Toya was a fiery one. I think that they felt as though they loved one another, but Issa wasn't always faithful.
Issa tells detectives during his on-again, off-again relationship with LaToya, he met and fell in love with a woman named Ava.
Ava became his primary focus. He was spending more and more time with her and less with LaToya.
But you kept seeing LaToya even after you married Ava.
Yeah.
Under no circumstances was he going to leave his wife for LaToya, but then he also wasn't leaving Toya. He wanted both.
At first, Issa had tried to keep the situation a secret from both of the women in his life, but LaToya eventually found out.
What's that?
I need to talk to you.
You serious right now?
She was very upset. She had spent the latter part of her teenage years, the earlier part of her 20s, dealing with him. And so for him to go and get married was a complete disruption to the life that they were going to have together.
Toya.
According to Issa, LaToya eventually came to accept the situation.
It's a tug of war where she wants to shut him out of her life and her relationship, but then she wants to keep that door open because she's in love with this man.
LaToya and Issa's affair continued, although there was one person who was left in the dark.
He clearly did not want his wife to know that he was still dealing with LaToya.
According to Issa, in the spring of 2002, things suddenly became more complicated.
Toya and Ava were pregnant at the same time, both with girls who ended up being only a few months apart.
Once LaToya realized she was carrying Issa's baby, she decided to make a more brazen move.
Hi, excuse me.
Can I help you?
Yes. My name is LaToya, and Issa and I have been in a relationship. I swear I didn't know anything about you. I just found out he was married.
Toya wanted her to know that I exist, we have a relationship, we've had a relationship, and I'm now pregnant, and we need to figure this out.
According to Issa, he came home to find the women face to face.
Toya, what are you doing?
Really?
He decided that he did not like what he thought was going on, them talking and discussing him.
It probably made you mad.
Ava was gonna find out eventually.
How'd Ava take it?
Not well.
Issa says he smoothed things over with Ava by promising the affair was over. But in secret, he continued to see LaToya and his child.
He and his wife and LaToya ended up in a pretty rocky love triangle. And unfortunately, a lot of drama comes in those situations.
But did this domestic drama have something to do with LaToya's disappearance?
Where were you yesterday around 1 o'clock?
Me and Ava went running errands until we picked the baby up from daycare.
And when was this?
4:30.
If he was telling the truth, that would give Issa and Ava alibis for when LaToya disappeared.
You're free to go.
Thank you.
After talking to Issa, detectives need to verify details of his statement.
They discovered some interesting facts that Issa conveniently left out.
Issa Santiago and LaToya Taylor had a 2001 documented case where there was a domestic incident. Although Issa was never convicted, he was charged.
Police reports were filed. The charge ended up getting dropped.
Detectives also discover that LaToya had taken out an order of protection against Ava.
Ava had also filed one against LaToya.
She was mad at her husband, but she seemed to be more mad at Toya for messing with her husband, for having a baby with her husband, as if Toya had done these things by herself.
Considering the animosity between them, detectives decide it's time they talked to Ava Santiago.
Thanks for coming in to talk to us, Ms. Santiago.
I ain't got nothing to say to you.
I just have a few questions to ask you.
Well, I'm not answering them.
She kept telling the police she wanted to speak to a lawyer,
Detectives promptly end the interview, with their suspicions of Ava now heightened.
Sit tight. Why wouldn't the wife be a suspect? He had an ongoing relationship with LaToya while he was in this marriage.
I definitely don't put it past her to have had something to do with it, especially if she knew about, this whole love triangle with my sister.
Had Ava done something to her rival?
Issa's story gave her an alibi, but he could have been covering for his wife.
However, before detectives take a closer look at Ava, they get a phone call that changes everything.
DC police believe they found the mysterious Jeep from the surveillance video.
It's found burning at 5 o'clock in the morning.
When investigators found out who the car belonged to, it took the investigation to a whole new level.
Sunday, June 15th, 2003. It's been 48 hours since LaToya Taylor walked out of her office at lunchtime and disappeared. But detectives have just received a tip that could be the key to solving the mystery.
DC police were called to the report of a vehicle fire on Spring Road in Northwest Washington.
The burnt-out vehicle is a dark-colored Jeep.
The Jeep matched the one in the surveillance footage that detectives believe LaToya got into before she went missing.
There's no body. No one perished in the fire.
Police run the Jeep's license plate through the registration database and make an alarming discovery.
They're shocked to learn that it's registered to the Santiagos, Issa and Ava.
The records also revealed that Issa recently reported the Jeep stolen.
However, it's when the car was reported stolen that makes detectives take note.
He didn't make the report until after they discovered the car on fire. Go figure.
Issa told investigators that he drove home as usual, parked it. The next morning, he came out, and the vehicle was gone.
Detectives working the LaToya Taylor case find that hard to believe.
First, there was the fact that Issa and Ava owned a Jeep very similar to the one spotted when LaToya disappeared.
And then, oh, wait a second. All of a sudden, his Jeep is stolen. And then, on top of that, set afire. There's not that much coincidence in the world. There just isn't.
Detectives have the burned Jeep towed to the crime lab for analysis and immediately find more reason to doubt Issa's story.
The ignition isn't what we call popped. The car wasn't hot-wired, anything of that nature.
The forensic team also finds that some of the Jeep's interior survived the fire.
Even though the Jeep was burned, it didn't burn up everything. In the back, we still had some carpet that you could get some good samples from.
However, the forensic search fails to turn up any evidence of foul play.
Tests didn't turn up any traces of blood or anything of that nature. Nothing to put LaToya in that vehicle.
Detectives still don't know what happened to LaToya. They hope a subpoena for her phone records will generate a lead.
This is still a missing persons report. Nobody's been accused of a crime at this point. So they really got LaToya's records to see if they might show at least where her phone is.
This is 2003. We didn't have the tracking that we know today.
We're not talking about GPS-type locations. We're talking about what cell tower is the phone pinging off of. So you can't pinpoint anybody based on this technology, but you can get general areas.
Tracing the towers LaToya's phone pinged off of gives detectives a clear idea of her movements after she walked out of the IRS building on Friday afternoon.
Her cell phone basically tracks down Route 5 onto Route 3. It's a southern highway going down through Maryland into Charles County, and maybe a mile or so before the Potomac River Bridge.
Then in the tiny rural town of Newburgh, Maryland, 33 miles from Prince George's County, LaToya's phone stops moving.
Newburgh, Maryland is off the beaten path. It's not DC at all. No one knew why LaToya had any business being that far away from her home.
That tower in Newburgh was picking up LaToya's cell phone with over 100 phone calls that were unanswered.
When you have all of these phone calls hitting off one tower, you know that that phone was not moving.
On Thursday, June 19th, DC detectives drive to Newburgh to assist in the search.
In that search area, you had the Charles County Sheriff's Office, the DC Police, Prince George's County Police, the Natural Resources Police. It really was a collaborative effort.
It is nothing but fields and woods off of 301. You're only a mile or so from the bridge. There's not much out there at all.
After hours of searching, one officer alerts the search team.
I think I see something up here.
It was back up off the road in a wooded area that no one would be in.
He approached that area and ultimately found what was a decomposed body.
She is wrapped in 2 large black plastic trash bags with duct tape holding them together.
Detectives are fairly certain the dead woman is LaToya Taylor.
It's a black woman wearing a denim dress similar to what LaToya Taylor had worn on the day of her disappearance.
She's out there in the field for a week. The temperatures were exceedingly hot at that time, and there was a lot of decomposition.
Despite the condition of the body, one thing is immediately clear.
There's a bullet hole in the back of her head.
Investigators believe this is no longer a missing persons case. This is a homicide.
June 19th, 2003. In a field near Newburgh, Maryland, 33 miles from Prince George's County, police have just found the body of a woman they believe is missing mother of 3, LaToya Taylor.
Detectives found her wrapped in garbage bags with a gunshot wound to her head.
There are no shell casings. There are no bullets. There's only a body.
The vegetation was mashed down, and it looked like a vehicle had maybe driven up to where the body was left.
When detectives survey the ground where the body had been, they find a crucial piece of evidence.
LaToya Taylor's phone was actually found underneath of her body in that field.
They charged the phone, turned it on, and quickly determined the phone was LaToya's, which meant the body was most certainly LaToya Taylor.
The news is devastating to LaToya's friends and family.
It's bittersweet because we was able to bring her home, but it wasn't the way we wanted her to come home.
I couldn't believe they just told me that my sister was not alive.
He told me they needed to talk to me. And said they found a body. I thought my world was over.
The next day, the medical examiner performs an autopsy and finds no evidence of a struggle, nor any traces of the killer's DNA. But she does recover one potentially useful clue from LaToya's remains.
The autopsy was able to find a couple of carpet fibers. Those carpet fibers were eventually compared to the carpet from the rear of the burnt-out Santiago Jeep, and they came back from the FBI as being consistent with fibers that were found in that Jeep.
Those fibers proved that LaToya Taylor had been in that Jeep after she was killed.
With this bombshell piece of forensic evidence, detectives turn up the heat on their main suspects: LaToya's boyfriend, Issa Santiago, and his wife, Ava.
At that point, detectives weren't sure if Issa or Ava were behind the murder or if both were involved.
Investigators get a search warrant to search the Santiago's home.
We did do search warrants, which did not turn up a handgun. We didn't find anything.
No handguns, no ammunition, no bloody clothing. Nothing to indicate they were involved in the homicide.
Next, detectives turn their attention to the couple's alibi for the afternoon of the murder.
Issa had told investigators that he and Ava had been running errands all day and they had picked up the baby together.
But when detectives contact the daycare to see if Ava and Issa picked up their child together, his story collapses.
According to people at the daycare, Ava had been alone.
A call to Ava's employer reveals that the rest of Issa's story about running errands with her is also a lie.
Ava's employer told investigators that she had been at work all day.
We know that she was at work at least as of 4:45, which means that she would not have been with him.
Ava is now crossed off investigators' list. But if Issa wasn't with his wife, where was he? Hoping to track Issa's movements the afternoon LaToya was killed, detectives subpoena his cell phone records.
Once you start looking at the phone records, then things really come into sharp focus. Because if you take a look at the location of Santiago's phone that he was using and LaToya Taylor's phone, you see both those phones basically at the same time marching down from Prince George's County into southern Maryland, both of them.
The cell phones paint the picture that clearly Issa and my sister were together.
Detectives track both phones all the way to the field outside Newburgh where LaToya's body was found.
My sister's cell phone stays out there with her. His cell phone comes back.
After comparing the phone records, detectives feel they have enough evidence to make an arrest. But it will take almost a year to get the warrant they need to bring Issa in.
It wasn't until the grand jury handed down their indictment that the Maryland State Police were able to locate Issa and apprehend him.
On May 24th, 2004, 11 months after finding LaToya's body, the authorities take Issa Santiago into custody.
Issa did not put up a fight. He was brought into the Forestville barrack, and he invokes his right to an attorney.
Look, I'm not saying anything.
We don't need you to.
What do you mean?
LaToya was seen getting into a Jeep you own. We have forensic evidence that proves that she was in your car the day she died. And your phone put you in Newburgh where the body was found. It was you, Issa.
Stand up.
I want my lawyer.
Stand up.
Issa was ultimately charged with second-degree murder.
Now that Issa Santiago is in jail, the question is whether or not prosecutors can keep him there.
This is a circumstantial case, and circumstantial cases are always a problem.
They didn't have any witnesses. They didn't have a murder weapon. And they didn't have a murder location.
There was a real concern Issa Santiago was going to get off scot-free.
In the early 2000s, cell phone tracking was far less precise than it is present day. Original methods could position a phone within 38 square miles of a tower. However, today, cell phone triangulation can pinpoint a phone's location within 3/4 of a square mile. May 24th, 2004.
Hands behind your back.
Detectives arrest Issa Santiago for the murder of 26-year-old LaToya Taylor, the mother of his now 20-month-old daughter.
When investigators finally arrested Issa, they wanted a solid case. They wanted evidentiary support. They wanted justice for LaToya Taylor.
It took a while. They were not going to rush and not be able to pursue the charges. Even though I didn't like it, I was fine with it. Because I knew once they got him, that was it.
Now it's up to prosecutors to make the murder charge stick.
We did not have any eyewitness to say that I saw him shoot LaToya Taylor or that I saw Issa Santiago dump this body in that field.
However, building their case in the months before Issa's arrest, detectives did uncover a motive.
Issa and LaToya had a court date coming up on June the 18th for child support.
Just 5 days after LaToya was reported missing, prosecutors contend Issa was willing to contribute, but he did not want it to be a matter for the courts or his wife, Ava.
He was okay just as long as it was on his terms. If he could do it at night and just give a little bit of money here and his wife not know, he's fine.
LaToya was not okay with the situation. The payment became sporadic, and he was coming by all hours of the night handing money off.
He was giving LaToya money, but as far as being court-ordered to pay it, yeah, that's a different level.
The moment LaToya went to court and filed child support legally, Issa had a problem. Investigators suspect that may have been a motive for murder.
When Issa stands trial in February of 2006, the prosecution lays out what they believe transpired the day LaToya was killed.
June 13th, they did make connection with each other very briefly over the phones in the morning,
Hi, LaToya speaking.
which in our view, that was the setup.
Hey, it's me. I got that money for you. Can you meet me at lunch?
Fine. I'll come out front.
Investigators believe Issa was the one, in fact, to pick up LaToya from the IRS building at lunchtime.
Have you got the money?
I have to go buy an ATM.
Okay.
According to the prosecution, Issa lured LaToya away from work for the sole purpose of killing her.
She got in the car with him and then was never heard from again.
He drove her somewhere, maybe under a bridge or some secluded area, wanting to talk about the court case. No one knew except for Issa.
Serious? After all that I do for those kids, and you're gonna try to take me to court?
You want to do right by our daughter? Then show up to court.
Everything was fine until you filed those papers.
Oh, look, Issa, I don't have time for this. Take me to work now.
You know what? He cowardly puts a bullet in the back of her head. And then he goes into cover-up mode. He cleans up and he bags her up, puts tape around her to hold her there. He starts driving down to Charles County, dumps her body, and drives back up.
According to prosecutors, the final piece of the puzzle was tracking the phones of both Issa and LaToya.
The cell phones are aligned, going in the same path. It's a no-brainer that he was driving the vehicle that took my sister to this field where she was dumped at and left there.
Prosecutors theorize that Issa must have disposed of the gun on the way back from Newburgh. Then, once back in D.C., after detectives started asking questions about LaToya's disappearance, Issa disposed of his Jeep, too.
To back up their theory, prosecutors presented the jury with the tiny carpet fibers recovered from LaToya's body that matched the interior of Issa's Jeep.
The forensics, the phone records, and the upcoming child support hearing all pointed to Issa as LaToya's killer.
There's proof and then there's proof, right? There's just too much coincidence for any reasonable fact finders to say, well, maybe this, maybe that.
Will the jury agree? On March 1st, 2006, the verdict is read.
Issa was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 55 years.
For LaToya's family, the possibility that Issa could ever be released falls far short of justice.
I don't think that he should ever be allowed to come out.
Part of me is still even more angry that he just absolutely refuses to admit to it and won't give the family some closure and tell us what happened.
With the trial behind them, all LaToya's family can do is continue to try to pick up the pieces.
Part of my heart was lost when I lost LaToya.
The silence in the quiet, tree-lined suburb of Oakwood had been a fragile, carefully curated performance for 32 years, a facade of normalcy that held its breath every time a siren wailed in the distance. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's lawn mowing schedules, but never the contents of their basements, a neighborhood defined by manicured hedges and locked doors that kept the world, and its ghosts, at bay. Yet, beneath the veneer of suburban complacency, a darkness had been festering, anchored to a single, blood-chilling evening in 1994 when a young woman simply vanished into the mist, leaving behind nothing but an open front door and a half-finished cup of coffee on the kitchen counter. That disappearance wasn't just a tragedy, it was a puncture wound in the heart of the community, a cold case that became the ghost story mothers whispered to daughters to keep them close, a riddle that taunted generations of detectives who walked the same streets, feeling the weight of unseen eyes watching from behind shuttered blinds. The mystery was a permanent resident, a suffocating humidity that never lifted until the Tuesday that changed everything, when a frantic, stumbling confession spilled out of a nondescript ranch-style house, shattering the peace of the neighborhood and unmasking a monster who had been living in the reflection of the sunrise for 3 decades. The scene of the disappearance, the Miller home, still holds the memory of that night, a static frame of domestic horror that time refused to dissolve. Forensic technicians back in '94 had swarmed the living room with their bulky equipment and desperate ambition, finding only a singular, puzzling clue, a jagged, unidentified piece of metallic shrapnel embedded in the hardwood floor, a detail that baffled experts and ignited 1,000 wild theories. Reporters had descended like vultures, their flashing cameras illuminating the faces of terrified neighbors who locked themselves away, waiting for a predator who seemed to vanish as quickly as the victim. There was no struggle, no scream heard by the neighbors, only the unsettling suddenness of an empty life where a vibrant, hopeful woman had stood just hours before. The case grew cold, not because of a lack of effort, but because of a total absence of logic. There were no footprints, no blood trails, no witnesses who saw a car, a face, or a shadow. It became a vacuum in the record, a file that was pulled and dusted off every 5 years by a new lead investigator, only to be shelved again, a testament to the fact that sometimes, in the heart of the safest neighborhoods, the most brutal truth can be hidden in plain sight. The investigation into the Miller disappearance was a labyrinth of dead ends, a pursuit of phantom leads that led detectives from the local docks to the deep, tangled woods on the edge of the county, leaving them with nothing but blisters and broken spirits. Every interview felt like an interrogation of the walls themselves, as neighbors offered guarded, rehearsed responses, their fear manifesting as a collective, silent conspiracy of denial. There were rumors of a wandering drifter, of an estranged lover, of a government cover-up, but every investigation into these narratives hit a brick wall of impossibility. The detectives lived in a state of perpetual frustration, their desks covered in maps marked with red strings that crisscrossed the town, connecting houses that had no business being connected. They saw patterns in the rain, signs in the rustling of the leaves, and heard confessions in the wind, but the reality was a blank, indifferent page. The victim's family, meanwhile, became the living embodiment of the cold case, their lives defined by the absence, their hope eroding with every passing calendar page, as the town slowly grew accustomed to the mystery, tucking the fear into their floorboards and deciding that it was safer to forget than to confront the possibility that the predator was still walking the same sidewalk. Decades passed, the kind of time that turns a headline into a myth and a victim into a fading photograph on a mantelpiece. The town shifted, young families moved in, old ones passed away, and the memory of the missing woman became a flickering candle in the gale of modernization. The investigators who had obsessed over the Miller file retired, their hair turning white as they carried the weight of the unsolved mystery into their final years, forever haunted by the one girl they couldn't save. It became a legend, the story of Oakwood's missing daughter, a cautionary tale that lost its teeth until it was nothing more than a ghost story told at backyard barbecues. But the truth, however deeply buried, has a momentum of its own, a relentless, ticking pressure that builds in the dark, waiting for the right moment to erupt. No secret can withstand the erosion of time, and in the case of the Miller disappearance, that moment arrived on an ordinary afternoon, in the form of a knock on the door that would rip the neighborhood's fragile reality into pieces, forcing the world to acknowledge that the monster had never left. The confession didn't come from a dramatic crime scene or a high-stakes standoff. It came as a low, trembling voice in a room filled with shadows, the sound of a man finally reaching the end of his capacity to carry the weight of his own existence. The suspect, a man whose name was synonymous with quiet, reliable suburban existence, had finally buckled, his resolve shattered by a conscience that could no longer hide behind the mask of normalcy. As the detectives recorded his words, the air in the precinct felt heavy, electrified by the sudden, sickening realization that the mystery of 1994 was about to be laid bare. He spoke with the detached, hollow tone of someone who had practiced the admission in his own mind 1,000 times, describing the night, the motive or lack thereof, and the location of a truth that had been hidden beneath the very foundation of the neighborhood. The detectives sat in a stunned, suffocating silence, their pens stilled, their eyes locked on a man they had seen at the local supermarket 100 times, a man who had served on the neighborhood watch and participated in the very searches that were intended to find his victim. News of the confession rippled through the community like a tremor, a seismic shock that left everyone reeling, unable to compute the dissonance between the man they knew and the truth that had just been unspooled. The street where the suspect lived became a crime scene of a different sort, a place of intense, invasive scrutiny as police tapes stretched across lawns and flashing lights turned the night into a distorted, cinematic display. Neighbors stood in their driveways, clutching each other, their faces pale as they realized that for 30 years they had been sleeping, eating, and playing within arm's reach of the architect of their greatest nightmare. The betrayal was absolute, a visceral, burning humiliation that transcended the crime itself. The predator hadn't been a stranger hiding in the bushes, but the neighbor who had helped pull their weeds and share their secrets. The shock was a physical weight, a communal breath stolen, as the reality of the 1994 mystery was replaced by the even more terrifying reality of the monster next door. As the authorities converged on the site identified in the confession, the entire town held its breath, the silence of the neighborhood now charged with a sickening, heavy anticipation. The search effort was no longer a frantic, aimless endeavor. It was a surgical, precise recovery of a past that had been entombed. When the first signs of the site began to emerge from the earth, the detectives felt not relief, but a hollow, devastating sense of finality. They had worked this case as a theory, a set of variables to be solved, but standing there in the cold, damp dark, they were confronted with the stark, skeletal remains of a life cut short, a brutal punctuation mark at the end of a long, agonizing sentence. The neighborhood watched from the periphery, a silent, weeping congregation, witnessing the end of an era and the beginning of a lifetime of trauma-informed reality. The cold case was closed, yes, but the cost was an irreversible damage to the soul of the suburb, a permanent alteration of the way they would ever experience the safety of their own homes. In the days that followed, the media frenzy reached a fever pitch, with reporters dissecting every aspect of the suspect's life, searching for the why that would make sense of the madness. But there was no why that satisfied the hunger for understanding. There was only the cold, jagged fact of his choice and the 30 years of deception that followed. The legal system began its slow, methodical grinding. The trial promised to be a public, agonizing airing of the darkest corner of their town's history, but the community had already reached its own verdict. The suspect's home was boarded up, a rotting monument to his double life, and the streets felt empty, haunted by the presence of a secret that had been so devastatingly exposed. The case had been solved, the justice system had functioned, but the victory felt empty, a Pyrrhic triumph that served only to confirm that the darkness didn't come from outside. It came from the heart of the community itself. The victim's family, who had spent their entire lives defined by the absence of their daughter, were now forced to reckon with the horrifying, concrete reality of her end. They moved through the town like specters, their grief no longer a quiet, private mourning but a public, agonizing display that mirrored the town's own shattered state. They had survived on the hope of finding her, and in the finding, they had lost the only thing they had left, the possibility of a different reality. The detectives who had worked the case for years visited them in the quiet, awkward moments after the trial, their own professional pride eclipsed by the profound, sorrowful weight of what they had finally uncovered. They had closed the book, but the story didn't end. It simply changed form, transitioning from a mystery to a tragedy, a permanent scar on the history of the suburb. As the months passed, the town slowly attempted to rebuild, to wash the blood from its history and move toward a future where the name of the victim was spoken with love rather than the fear of the unsolved. They planted trees, they dedicated spaces to her memory, and they spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the young woman who had been stolen before her time. But the legacy of the case remained a shadow in the corner of every eye, a reminder that the world is a dangerous place, even in the safest of neighborhoods. The cold case was closed, the secret was out, but the neighborhood was forever changed. The quiet of Oakwood no longer a comfort but a haunting, a constant echo of the night in 1994 that never truly ended. They had found the truth, and in doing so, they had lost the only thing that had kept them safe, the illusion that they were living in a world they understood. Now, years after the confession rocked the foundation of their lives, the neighborhood remains a place of uneasy truce with its own history. The house where the suspect lived has been demolished, the lot now a patch of green that no one walks on, a silent, empty space that serves as a permanent, unspoken memorial to the truth. The town has moved on, the children have grown, and the cycle of life continues, but the memory of the missing daughter remains, a foundational truth that informs every interaction and every lock turned at night. They are a community of survivors, people who know the price of safety and the burden of the truth, and who live every day in the knowledge that the past is never truly dead. It's just waiting, beneath the surface of the manicured lawn, for the right moment to speak. The case of the 1994 disappearance is a closed file, a legal victory, a historic moment, but for those who lived through the revelation, it is a lifetime of haunted memories, a testament to the fact that some secrets never really vanish. They just become a part of the air we breathe. The aftermath of the confession was not a period of healing, but a slow, excruciating descent into the raw, pulsating details of a 32-year-old nightmare. As the suspect, a man whose identity was now inextricably linked to the haunting absence of the victim, remained in custody, the detectives began the monumental task of peeling back the layers of his carefully constructed life. They moved through his home with a grim, surgical focus, documenting the mundane objects that had taken on a sinister significance, the tools in the shed, the journals tucked behind loose floorboards, the family photographs that now appeared as scenes from a long-running, masterfully executed performance. It was a study in profound psychological dissonance. How does a man go about his day, buying groceries, paying taxes, and attending church, while knowing that the very soil of his backyard held the answers to the town's deepest, most persistent sorrow? The investigators didn't just look for physical evidence. They looked for the architecture of his obsession, the internal logic that had sustained his deception for decades. They found it in the small, seemingly irrelevant items, a collection of newspaper clippings about the disappearance, hidden away like a trophy, a meticulously maintained diary that offered glimpses into a mind that had commodified a young woman's life into a private, dark sanctuary of memory. Every item processed by the forensic team felt like a hammer blow to the collective consciousness of Oakwood. The residents who had lived alongside him for years began to re-examine their own interactions, parsing through their memories for the subtle red flags they had missed, the moments where his mask had momentarily slipped. They remembered his overeagerness to join the search parties in the early days, the way he would offer words of comfort that now sounded like calculated diversions, and the strange, quiet satisfaction he seemed to take in the community's shared grief. It was as if the town were finally watching a film they had been starring in, only to realize the protagonist was a villain they had invited to dinner. The detective in charge of the case, a man who had been a rookie during the initial search, felt the crushing weight of that irony. He had stood next to this man on a cold October morning in 1994, offering him a shoulder to lean on while they scanned the woods, never suspecting that the comfort he was giving was being accepted by the very hands that had committed the act. That realization became the dark engine of his investigation, driving him to leave no stone unturned in the pursuit of a truth that had been mocking them for nearly half a century. The interrogation process was a psychological gauntlet that spanned weeks, a series of interviews that were as much about the dissection of a soul as they were about the collection of facts. The suspect, stripped of his suburban armor, became a frail, erratic figure in the sterile, fluorescent-lit room, his narratives shifting and splintering as he tried to reconcile the reality of his confinement with the life he had so meticulously fabricated. He spoke of the isolation of the early 90s, of a resentment that had curdled into an impulsive, violent decision, but he could never fully articulate the void that had driven him to act. He treated his crime not as a murder, but as a defining event that had granted him a bizarre, secret power over the town. The detectives watched him with a mix of clinical detachment and visceral anger, struggling to contain their own emotions as they listened to him narrate the final moments of the victim's life with a chilling, dispassionate clarity. It was a confession that didn't bring closure. It brought a horrifying, high-definition understanding of a tragedy that had previously been a vague, haunting silhouette. Outside, the neighborhood became a site of pilgrimage and trauma, a place where people would drive slowly past the empty house, their faces etched with a combination of dread and morbid curiosity. The police tape was a physical barrier, but it could not contain the emotional fallout that saturated the air. Families who had lived there during the 90s, and who had since moved away, returned to walk the streets, seeking some kind of resolution to the fear that had defined their formative years. The detectives found themselves acting as grief counselors for a town that had forgotten how to mourn, answering questions they couldn't possibly answer, and providing a stable, reassuring presence amidst the chaos. They knew that the arrest was merely the opening of a wound that had been festering for decades, and they were the ones tasked with cleaning the infection. Every day brought new reports of local residents experiencing anxiety, nightmares, and a sudden, sharp suspicion of their neighbors. The suburban fabric of Oakwood was unraveling, thread by thread, as the implications of the confession began to settle in. The legal proceedings were a grinding, methodical march toward a judgment that everyone knew was already a foregone conclusion. Yet, the trial became a theater of the absurd, a place where the community was forced to look at the details of the crime in an agonizing, public forum. The prosecution laid out the timeline with a precision that made the room gasp, showing how the suspect had moved through the town during those critical hours, his actions governed by a cool, sociopathic necessity. They showed the location of the burial, the specific implements used, and the chilling, cold-blooded efficiency with which he had returned to his life, as if the world were unchanged. For the victim's family, every day of the trial was a re-traumatization, a descent back into the agony of 1994, but they endured it with a stoic, heartbreaking resilience that humbled the entire courtroom. They were the moral anchors of the proceedings, the people whose enduring love for their daughter had finally, after 32 years, forced the truth out of the shadows. There was a peculiar, uncomfortable silence that permeated the town in the evenings during the trial, a time when the streets were usually alive with the hum of suburban life. People stayed indoors, the lights dimmed, the televisions tuned to the local news as if waiting for a signal that the nightmare was finally over. The feeling was one of shared, quiet dread. It was as if the town itself were on trial, being asked to account for the decades of silence that had allowed the suspect to flourish in their midst. They debated the failings of the past, the lack of foresight, and the collective blind spots that had kept them safe in their ignorance. It was a period of intense, painful introspection that forced every resident to confront their own role in the silence and to wonder if they had truly been living in a community or just a collection of individuals who had chosen the comfort of their own safety over the pursuit of the uncomfortable truth. The detectives, for their part, were beginning to see the patterns that linked the 1994 case to other, forgotten incidents in the region, petty disappearances, unexplained anomalies, and strange behaviors that had been dismissed at the time. They began to wonder if the Miller case was the only one, if the suspect's life had been a long, dark progression of incremental violence that had gone unnoticed because no one had ever dared to look close enough. It was a terrifying, overwhelming prospect, a realization that they were holding the thread to a much larger, more complex tapestry of tragedy. They spent their nights in the station, buried under the weight of old files, looking for the whispers of other victims who had been lost to the same indifference that had nearly claimed the legacy of the Miller disappearance. It was a mission that transcended the current case, a commitment to the idea that the truth, once uncovered, demands to be applied to every corner of the past. The sense of community cohesion that had once defined Oakwood was replaced by a more fragmented, guarded reality. Neighbors no longer trusted the boundaries they had once taken for granted. They looked at their lawns, their hedges, and their backyards as potential sites of hidden, dark information. The confession had not just solved a case, it had destroyed the myth of the safe, suburban haven. The detectives were aware of this, and they made it a priority to facilitate town hall meetings where the community could express their fear and find ways to heal. They were the bridge between the traumatic past and an uncertain future, providing the support and the structure that the residents so desperately needed. They knew that the damage done to the soul of Oakwood was deep and pervasive, but they also knew that the only way forward was to address it with the same, relentless commitment they had brought to the hunt for the truth. As the days turned into weeks, the focus of the community shifted from the shock of the confession to the long, laborious process of reconstruction. They began to organize, to form committees, and to engage in the kind of honest, difficult conversations that had been absent for 30 years. They talked about the victim, about the life she had led, and about the legacy of strength that her family had displayed throughout the ordeal. They started to see the case not just as a tragedy, but as a call to action, a reminder that safety is not a passive state, but an active, shared responsibility. The detectives saw this shift, and they felt a flicker of hope, a sense that the work they were doing might, in the long run, actually lead to a stronger, more resilient community. They were the architects of this new, hard-won reality, the ones who had forced the truth into the light and were now guiding the town through the difficult, necessary task of moving on. In the final, exhausted moments of the legal process, the lead detective found himself standing in the Miller home, which had been returned to the family but remained a place of profound, lingering grief. He stood in the kitchen, in the very spot where the half-finished cup of coffee had sat on that final, fateful night in 1994, and he felt the weight of all the years that had passed. He understood that the case was closed, the monster was caught, and the justice system had done its part, but he also knew that the true resolution was something that could only happen in the hearts of the people who lived there. He felt a quiet, persistent sense of duty, not to the case, which was now a matter of record, but to the people, to the story, and to the girl who had been lost and finally found. He walked out of the house, the sun setting over the neighborhood in a blaze of colors, and he knew that while the nightmare was over, the memory of it would remain, a silent, watchful presence in the heart of the town, forever reminding them of the truth they had so painfully, so definitively discovered. The weight of the trial's conclusion didn't bring the expected lightness of a burden lifted. Instead, it introduced a new, heavy silence, a somber clarity that descended upon Oakwood. The conviction was absolute, the sentencing harsh and final, yet for the residents, the courtroom's gavel strike was merely the beginning of an arduous, psychological integration. They had spent over 3 decades subconsciously compartmentalizing the missing woman as a ghost, a legend, or a tragic outlier of a different era. Now, she was a visceral, present reality, her name reclaimed from the dusty archives and placed firmly into the center of the town's living history. The lead detective, watching the aftermath from the periphery, noticed a profound shift in the neighborhood's cadence. The residents no longer walked their streets with the aimless comfort of the past. They moved with an intentionality, a newfound awareness of the domestic space as a place where hidden things could fester. The illusion of the safe suburb had been thoroughly dismantled, and in its place was a community grappling with the realization that the most dangerous environments are those defined by a curated silence. The forensic team, exhausted by the meticulous nature of the excavation and the subsequent trial, found themselves returning to the Miller home one final time, not as investigators, but as stewards of a recovered narrative. They walked the rooms where the tragedy had ignited, the air still thick with the residue of a trauma that had stalled in 1994. It was in these quiet moments that the sheer scale of the deception became overwhelming. The suspect hadn't just stolen a life. He had stolen the time, the potential, and the peace of mind of an entire generation. Every piece of furniture, every scrape on the wall, every faint shadow in the corner held a weight that defied categorization. The detectives recognized then that their role had evolved. They weren't just the men who caught the killer. They were the historians of the nightmare, the ones who had to hold the broken pieces of Oakwood's identity until the community was strong enough to pick them up themselves. Meanwhile, the local press had moved on, shifting their focus to the next sensation, leaving the people of Oakwood to navigate the debris of the revelation on their own. This isolation, while initially isolating, eventually proved to be a catalyst for a deeper, more organic form of local support. Spontaneous gatherings began in the public park, not for formal memorial services, but for quiet, sustained conversations about how to coexist with the truth. They talked about the victim, her laughter, her dreams, the way she liked her coffee, the small, human details that had been erased by the media's focus on the crime. They were collectively rebuilding her personhood, shifting the narrative from the cold case to the stolen life. It was a delicate, vital process, a way of asserting that their community was defined by the people they cherished, not the predators they had failed to see. The detective often sat in the back of these meetings, a quiet observer of the town's awakening, recognizing that the resolution of the murder was only the preliminary stage of the community's real work. The logistical challenge of managing the suspect's property, now a void at the center of the neighborhood, fell to the town council, which was paralyzed by the symbolic weight of the land. It couldn't be sold, it couldn't be renovated, and it couldn't simply be ignored. The detective offered his input, suggesting that the site be transformed not into a memorial of stone, but into a space that emphasized the continuity of the community's life, perhaps a garden or a small playground, something that would replace the history of the house with the laughter of a future that the victim had been denied. This vision, while met with initial resistance, eventually gained momentum. It was an act of defiance, a way of claiming the ground back from the shadow of the crime and turning it into a site of communal renewal. The act of dismantling the suspect's home became a therapeutic ritual for the town, a symbolic purging of the darkness that had lived within those walls. Yet, despite the progress, there were those for whom the revelation was the final, breaking point. Families who had lived through the era of fear decided to leave, unable to reconcile the reality of the confession with their memories of the town. These departures left a vacuum in the social fabric, a sense of loss that rippled through the schools and the neighborhood organizations. The detective saw these exits not as a failure, but as a necessary transition. Some people simply could not dwell in a house that had been unmasked as a tomb. He spent his final weeks on the case facilitating transitions, assisting those who needed to move on, and ensuring that the institutional knowledge of the investigation was preserved in a way that wouldn't haunt the future. He was becoming a figure of transition, a bridge builder between the Oakwood that lived in fear and the Oakwood that would, eventually, have to learn how to trust again. The internal dynamics of the police department also began to reflect this change. The younger officers, who had entered the force long after the case had gone cold, were transformed by their involvement in the final stages of the investigation. They weren't burdened by the failures of the 90s. They were energized by the success of the present. They began to implement new protocols for missing persons, ones that prioritized immediate, aggressive, and highly analytical responses, informed by the hard-won lessons of the Miller file. The precinct was no longer a place of reactive policing. It was becoming a hub of proactive vigilance. The detective watched this evolution with profound satisfaction. He realized that the case of the missing daughter had not just been a failure of the past, it was the engine of the department's future. He had helped create a system that would ensure no other family in the county would have to wait 32 years for the truth. In the late autumn, when the leaves were turning and the air was crisp, the final demolition of the suspect's house commenced. The detective stood across the street, watching the heavy machinery tear through the timber and drywall. It was a violent, noisy, and deeply cathartic spectacle. Each piece of debris that fell brought with it a sense of relief, a loosening of the tension that had gripped the street for so long. The dust that rose into the air felt like the shedding of a long, dark skin. For the first time in his career, he saw the physical manifestation of the closure he had fought for. The void left behind was a clean slate, a testament to the fact that while a life had been ended in that house, it would no longer contain the darkness. He felt a profound, quiet gratitude for the machines, for the workers, and for the simple, brutal finality of the process. As he drove home that evening, the road feeling longer and the landscape more familiar than he had realized, he reflected on the nature of secrets. People spend their lives hoarding them, protecting them, believing they are safe as long as they are kept behind closed doors, but the house in Oakwood proved that secrets have a shelf life, and that the cost of keeping them is the slow, agonizing erosion of one's own humanity. The suspect had lived his life as if he were an island, believing he was the only inhabitant of his own dark reality, only to discover, at the very end, that he was merely a footnote in a story that belonged to the town. The truth had finally spoken, and in its resonance, it had cleared the air, leaving behind a silence that was no longer oppressive, but expansive, a clean, blank space where a new future could be built. He arrived at his own house, his hands still feeling the ghost of the steering wheel, and he sat in the dark for a long time before turning on the lights. He knew that the Miller case would follow him for the rest of his life, a constant, flickering image in the back of his mind. But it was no longer a weight, it was a guide. It was the yardstick by which he would measure his future investigations, the fundamental truth that had shaped his understanding of the world. He was a different man than the one who had walked into that living room in 1994, and he was grateful for the transformation. The world was darker than he had once believed, but it was also more capable of resilience than he had ever dared to hope. He leaned back, listening to the quiet settling of his house, feeling the deep, resonant calm of a man who had done his part and, in doing so, had finally earned his rest. The chapter was closed, the book was set aside, and the world, vast, unpredictable, and finally quiet, continued its steady, inevitable rotation into the unknown. The transition of Oakwood from a crime scene to a place of reconstruction was neither swift nor linear. It was a jagged, oscillating journey that forced every resident to confront the fragility of their suburban identity. In the months after the demolition of the suspect's home, the lot remained a barren, fenced-off scar in the middle of the block, a physical reminder of the void that had occupied the neighborhood for over 3 decades. Some residents wanted it turned into a park, others demanded it be paved over, and a few whispered that the ground itself was cursed, tainted by the secret it had held for so long. The lead detective, now nearing the end of his tenure, found himself acting as a mediator in these discussions, listening to the town's conflicting desires for erasure versus remembrance. He understood the discomfort. When you uncover a monster in your own backyard, you don't just move on. You have to redefine your relationship with the very land you stand on. He spent his evenings walking the perimeter of that empty lot, watching the way the neighborhood shifted around it, observing how the residents began to reestablish their connections in a world where the suspect was no longer the focal point of their collective gaze. The emotional labor of the victim's family during this period was the most poignant narrative of all. They had achieved the primary goal, truth and justice, but they were now faced with the long, tedious process of integrating that truth into a life that had been fundamentally defined by its absence. They became quiet, albeit powerful, advocates for the idea that closure is not a destination, but a practice. They moved through the town with a dignity that silenced any lingering voyeurism, refusing to let the tragedy dictate the trajectory of their remaining years. Their presence was a steadying force for the neighborhood, a reminder that resilience is built on the willingness to look at the wreckage and choose, every day, to build something else. The detectives kept in close contact, not as law enforcement officers anymore, but as allies, checking in on the family's well-being and ensuring that they had the resources to manage the public scrutiny that still flared up on anniversaries of the 1994 event. The legal and forensic community, meanwhile, had begun to use the Oakwood case as a cornerstone for training sessions on how to conduct long-term, cold case investigations. The detective was invited to present his findings at regional symposiums, where he detailed the intersection of old-school surveillance and modern forensic genealogy. He stood before rooms filled with young, ambitious investigators, explaining that the most critical element of the Oakwood case wasn't the advanced science, but the persistence of the human spirit, the refusal to treat the victim's file as a piece of paper, and the commitment to viewing it as a person who deserved to be found. He emphasized the danger of the cold case label, warning his audience that the term itself was a form of defeat, a way of giving permission to the world to forget. His presentations were transformative for these young officers, shifting their perspective on their own work and instilling in them a sense of urgency that transcended the standard bureaucratic pace of their departments. Back in Oakwood, the neighborhood was slowly reclaiming its identity, not as a place where a murder had happened, but as a place where the people had learned to look after one another. The garden that was eventually planted on the site of the suspect's home became a vibrant, colorful testament to this change. It wasn't a somber monument. It was a functional, living space filled with native flowers, benches, and a small, quiet plaque that bore the victim's name. Not her dates, not the circumstances of her loss, but her name and the simple, profound fact of her belonging to the community. The act of planting it, of turning the soil where the nightmare had been hidden, was a deeply cathartic moment for the neighborhood. They had taken the rot and transformed it into growth. It was a subtle, necessary reclamation, an assertion that the life they were currently living mattered more than the tragedy that had once been imposed upon them. However, the shadow of the suspect's betrayal remained a subtle, haunting influence on the way the town interacted with outsiders. People were more reserved, their hedges grew a little taller, and the sense of unfettered trust that had characterized the Oakwood of the 90s was gone, replaced by a more cautious, guarded form of civility. The detective watched this change with a sense of understanding. You cannot remove a cancer from a body without leaving a scar, and the scar on Oakwood was the loss of their collective naivety. He often wondered if this was a necessary evolution, if, in the modern world, a bit of guardedness is the price one must pay for a life that is truly secure. He concluded that the town hadn't lost its soul, it had merely hardened its exterior, learning that safety is not a passive gift, but something that must be earned and maintained through active awareness. The investigation's files, now bound and archived in the department's main vault, served as the definitive record of the case, but for the detective, they were also a personal diary of his own professional maturation. He reflected on the mistakes of the early days, the misleads, the overly narrow focuses, the moments of despair, and saw them as the vital steps that had eventually led him to the breakthrough. He realized that the investigative process is inherently flawed because the people conducting it are human, and the ultimate victory of the Oakwood case was not that they had been perfect, but that they had stayed the course long enough to correct their own failings. He felt a sense of profound, hard-won peace in that realization. The case had tested his limits, stripped away his ego, and forced him to become the kind of investigator who could look at a decades-old enigma and see the living truth buried beneath the layers of time. As winter began to approach, the garden on the lot entered a period of dormancy, the colors fading into the browns and grays of the season. The detective stopped by one final time before his scheduled retirement. He sat on one of the benches, watching the light fade behind the trees, listening to the familiar sounds of the suburb returning home from work, the clicking of garage doors, the bark of a dog, the distant conversation of neighbors. It was exactly the kind of quiet, ordinary afternoon that had been stolen from the victim in 1994, and as he sat there, he felt a profound sense of completeness. The neighborhood was safe, the truth was known, and the cycle of the mystery had finally been broken. He had been a part of that resolution, and as he stood up to walk away, he realized that he no longer needed to look over his shoulder. The darkness had been accounted for, and the world, no matter how fragile, was finally allowed to be just as it was, a place where life continues and where the past is finally allowed to rest in the place it belongs. He walked to his car, his keys jingling in the crisp air, ready to leave the weight of the investigation behind, knowing that he had done his part to restore the order that had been broken so long ago. The streetlights flickered to life, one by one, illuminating the path forward, and for the first time, he didn't feel the need to look back, confident that the truth was finally, firmly anchored in the ground they had all worked so hard to reclaim. The finality of the detective's departure marked a subtle, yet unmistakable boundary in the timeline of Oakwood. As he surrendered his badge and the keys to the archival vault, there was no grand ceremony, no ticker-tape parade. There was only the quiet, rhythmic clicking of a lock, signaling the end of an era. The neighborhood, having survived the brutal excavation of its own history, began to settle into a rhythm of resilience that felt different from the complacency of the past. It was no longer a suburban bubble floating in a vacuum of ignorance. It was a community that had seen its own reflection in the darkest of mirrors and had chosen to stand its ground. The garden on the suspect's former lot had become a focal point of this new reality, a space where the residents acknowledged the loss of the victim not with the hysterical grief of the initial revelation, but with a quiet, persistent dignity that seemed to permeate the very atmosphere of the block. The detective, watching from a distance as he began his life beyond the precinct, felt a profound, lingering sense of completion, the realization that his presence was no longer a necessity for the town's survival. The younger detectives who stepped into the roles he had vacated were a different breed, shaped by the pedagogical legacy of the Miller investigation. They didn't view the past as a collection of unsolvable riddles. They viewed it as a database of potential solutions. They worked with a technical sophistication that made the investigations of the 90s look like primitive, fumbling attempts, yet they carried a humility that had been absent in their predecessors. They understood that the Oakwood case was a monument to the dangers of investigative arrogance and the cost of institutional inertia. They sat in the same briefing rooms, looked at the same maps, and navigated the same corridors, but they did so with the awareness that they were the inheritors of a hard-learned lesson. They were the architects of a future where no file was ever left to gather dust, and where the memory of the victim was a foundational element of their commitment to the law. The family of the victim had found a place of relative, if fragile, peace. They no longer carried the heavy, suffocating weight of the unknown, but they had to navigate the reality that the resolution of the murder had not brought back their daughter. They had arrived at a place of grace, where they could speak about her life as if she were a living, breathing part of their daily experience, rather than a frozen, ghostly figure from the past. Their home, once a silent shrine to a missing person, was now filled with the normal, chaotic life of a family that had finally been allowed to mourn. They continued their work with the Scholarship Fund, a mission that had become the defining aspect of their recovery. It was a tangible, lasting contribution to the world, a way of ensuring that the victim's name would continue to carry the promise of education, opportunity, and scientific integrity, rather than the memory of the trauma that had defined it for so long. Meanwhile, the town of Oakwood continued to evolve in the broader context of the regional landscape. It was no longer just another quiet, unremarkable suburb. It was the town that had confronted its own devil and won. This reputation brought a paradoxical blend of increased interest and a protective, communal instinct. New residents, attracted by the stability and the evident strength of the community's character, moved in, but they were met with a population that was deeply invested in the protection of their social fabric. The neighborhood watch programs, once perfunctory and largely ignored, became vibrant, essential networks of communication and mutual support. The residents were observant, thoughtful, and engaged. They recognized that the true defense against the darkness wasn't just cameras and locks, but the simple, vital act of knowing the people who lived next door and being willing to ask the difficult questions when something didn't seem right. The legal and judicial system in the state began to look at the Oakwood resolution as a paradigm shift. Legislative changes, prompted by the advocacy of the victim's family and the procedural successes of the prosecution, led to the creation of a specialized, statewide task force dedicated to the forensic investigation of long-dormant cases. The resources allocated to this initiative were a testament to the fact that the Oakwood case had fundamentally changed the public's expectations of law enforcement. No longer were the police permitted to dismiss a case as cold after the initial leads had dried up. There was now a systematic, high-tech accountability that demanded periodic review and, where possible, the application of new analytical methodologies. The legacy of the 1994 disappearance was a permanent, systemic improvement in the way the state sought to resolve the most difficult of crimes, a testament to the persistence of the truth even after the passage of decades. In the precinct itself, the lead detective's retirement meant the closing of a personal chapter, but the office of the lead investigator remained a place of focus and steady, unwavering purpose. The whiteboards were always filled with the notes of ongoing inquiries, the screens always flickering with the data of new leads, and the air always vibrating with the quiet, intense energy of men and women who were absolutely certain of the importance of their work. They moved through their responsibilities with a calm, deliberate professionalism that was the ultimate tribute to the years of effort that had finally yielded the Oakwood truth. They knew that their victory in that case was not an endpoint, but a milestone, a point of reference that would guide them through all the enigmas that were yet to emerge. They were not chasing ghosts. They were systematically, scientifically, and courageously bringing the truth into the light, one case at a time. As the years began to blur, the story of the 1994 disappearance faded from the headlines and transitioned into the status of a foundational myth, a story told to teach, to warn, and to remember. It was a tale of how a community had been shaken to its core, how it had allowed the darkness to thrive, and how it had eventually found the courage to reclaim its own safety. For those who were children when the event occurred, the mystery was a distant, dark tale from their parents' generation, a part of the town's local folklore that carried with it the weight of history. For the parents, it was a reminder of the fragility of the peace they enjoyed and the absolute necessity of remaining vigilant in the face of an unpredictable world. The story was a part of the air they breathed, a silent, watchful presence that ensured the town never again took its own tranquility for granted. In the quiet, reflective twilight of his life, the detective would often find himself sitting in his garden, watching the sky change color over the distant, rolling landscape. He didn't think about the suspect, or the crime, or the long, grueling years of the investigation with any sense of lingering anger. He thought about the people he had helped, the connections he had made, and the fundamental, immutable fact that he had been a part of a process that brought justice to a place that had been starved of it for far too long. He had found a profound, lasting serenity in the knowledge that his life's work had mattered, and that in the end, it was the persistent, unblinking light of the truth that had guided him through the long, shadowed journey. He had no regrets, only a sense of profound, hard-won peace, knowing that the story of the 1994 disappearance had finally reached its necessary, definitive resolution. The town of Oakwood, as it continued its steady, inevitable rotation into the future, was a place defined by its history, but not held hostage by it. It was a place where people lived, worked, and grew old, a place where the memory of a lost daughter had become a catalyst for a life that was lived with more intention, more community, and more heart. The darkness had been forced to retreat, the truth had claimed its rightful place, and the community, finally, truly, was able to exist in the steady, honest light of a reality that they had worked so hard to build. The cold case was a distant memory, a closed file in a long-dead archive, but the spirit of the resolution lived on in every action, every conversation, and every day that the people of Oakwood chose to face the world together, unafraid, vigilant, and profoundly aware of the truth that had set them free. The story, in its final, echoing realization, was not about the tragedy. It was about the resilience of the human soul to persist in the search for the truth, no matter how cold, no matter how deep, and no matter how long the shadows might have stretched before the light finally broke through. The evolution of the Oakwood narrative continued to ripple through the decades, becoming a testament to the fact that justice is not merely a legal verdict, but a structural change in how a community perceives its own safety. As the years progressed, the town did not become immune to the typical hardships of time. It faced economic shifts, demographic changes, and the relentless creep of modernization. Yet, there remained a peculiar, distinctive resilience in the way Oakwood responded to adversity. It was as if the town had been inoculated by its own history. The residents possessed a quiet, collective wisdom that prioritized transparency over comfort. Whenever a new mystery arose, a missing child, an unexplained break-in, a sudden disappearance, the community did not descend into the paralyzing hysteria of the 90s. Instead, they mobilized with a practiced, methodical efficiency. They knew the signs. They knew the value of the first 48 hours. They knew that silence, while seductive in its promise of safety, was the ultimate architect of tragedy. This cultural shift was most evident in the local school system, where the narrative of the 1994 disappearance was integrated into the curriculum, not as a grim lesson in fear, but as a study in civic responsibility and forensic science. Students were taught the importance of observing their environment, the weight of their own voices, and the critical nature of the social bonds that connected them to one another. The scholarship fund, born from the victim's family, continued to expand its reach, supporting a new generation of investigators who approached their work with a unique blend of scientific rigor and humanistic empathy. These young scholars often returned to Oakwood to conduct seminars, their presence serving as a bridge between the town's traumatic past and its hopeful, intellectual future. They were the architects of a culture that refused to let the darkness be the final word, a culture that insisted on the necessity of light, no matter how distant or difficult the truth might appear. The detectives who had succeeded the lead investigator found themselves navigating a professional landscape that was vastly different from the one he had inhabited. They were equipped with advanced predictive analytics, genetic mapping tools that were unimaginable in the early days of the Miller investigation, and a digital network that spanned across state lines. Yet, they remained grounded by the physical files in the basement vault. Often, they would pull the Miller case study, not for the evidence, but for the human lesson embedded within it. They studied the faces of the initial responders, the handwritten notes of the early investigators, and the poignant, desperate letters from the victims' parents. It was a reminder that behind every binary code and forensic report, there was a heartbeat, a life, and a family whose existence had been fractured. This sense of historical continuity was what gave the department its soul. It reminded them that their work was not an abstract exercise in data management, but a profound, moral responsibility to the people who relied on them for the truth. In the public square, the garden on the suspect's former lot had matured into a verdant, tranquil retreat, a space that defied the expectations of a crime site. It had become a place where people of all ages came to sit, to think, and to exist in a space that had been reclaimed from the horror of the past. The plaque bearing the victim's name was often adorned with small, fresh flowers, left by people who had never known her but who felt a profound, communal connection to the story. It was a beautiful, quiet affirmation that while the suspect had attempted to erase her existence from the world, the community had succeeded in etching her name permanently into their own heart. The garden served as a perpetual, living reminder that evil, even when it is meticulously hidden, is ultimately temporary, while the human capacity for remembrance and restoration is, in its own way, eternal. The legal system within the county also underwent a quiet revolution. The judiciary and the prosecution, having witnessed the systemic failures and ultimate successes of the Oakwood Resolution, adopted a philosophy of active investigation. They moved away from the passive, reactive model of the past, instead advocating for the periodic, mandatory review of all inactive files. This legislative commitment to accountability became the gold standard for the region. It meant that a case was no longer allowed to fade into the background simply because the trail had grown cold. It meant that the state accepted a permanent, ongoing burden to seek the truth. This was perhaps the most lasting, structural legacy of the 1994 tragedy. It changed the law itself, transforming the state's relationship with its forgotten victims from one of indifference to one of perpetual, active vigilance. As for the lead investigator, now living in the quiet, peaceful years of his retirement, he often spent his mornings reading through the reports of the Regional Cold Case Task Force. He saw the successes, the resolutions, and the moments of profound relief that echoed the resolution of the Oakwood case. He knew that the system was not perfect, that there would always be failures and challenges, but he also knew that he had helped build something that was significantly better than what had existed before. He felt no need for accolades. The satisfaction was internal, a steady, quiet hum of fulfillment that accompanied him through the days. He had done his part, he had helped turn the tide, and he had helped ensure that for the people of Oakwood, and for the families of victims across the region, the light of truth would always be something they could rely on, no matter how long the shadows might have stretched in the past. The town itself continued its rhythmic, steady existence, a place where people lived, worked, and loved, defined by the shared knowledge of what they had been through. There was a depth to their social interactions, a kind of unspoken understanding that characterized their relationships. They knew that their town was not a utopia, that darkness was a possibility that existed in the world, but they also knew that they had the capacity to confront it. They were no longer the people they had been in 1994, the people who were afraid to look at the truth because it was too uncomfortable or too inconvenient. They were the people of the resolution, the people who had stared into the void and had walked away with a clearer, more profound understanding of their own power and their own responsibility. The Oakwood story was complete, but the life of the community continued, more aware, more connected, and more committed to the pursuit of the truth than ever before. In the final, contemplative hours of the day, as the sky faded into the deep, indigo hues of the evening, the town looked exactly as it always had, a collection of houses, streets, and families nestled in the vast, open expanse of the landscape. But the air felt different, thinner, clearer, scrubbed of the secret that had lingered there for so long. It was the air of a place where the truth had been spoken and where the past was finally allowed to be just that, the past. The mystery had been replaced by the quiet, steady reality of a world that was no longer haunted, but entirely, finally, their own. The investigation was over, the file was closed, and the community, resilient, vigilant, and profoundly human, was ready for whatever the future might hold, secure in the knowledge that they were no longer walking in the dark, but in the enduring, illuminating light of the truth they had so painfully earned. The story had come full circle, ending not in the silence of an unsolved crime, but in the resonant, shared peace of a reality that was finally, completely understood. The passage of time in Oakwood has long since shed its jagged edges, rounding out into a narrative of continuity that the residents of the 90s would have found unrecognizable. The site of the suspect's home, once a focal point of intense, fearful curiosity, has become a settled part of the neighborhood's ecology. The garden there has matured, its perennial roots digging deep into soil that has been thoroughly cleansed of its dark history. Children who play near the small plaque bearing the victim's name do so with a casual, easy innocence, unaware of the specific, brutal facts that once tore this community apart, yet they are part of a generation raised in an environment that inherently values transparency and connection. This is perhaps the ultimate victory, that the tragedy has been sublimated into the background hum of a community that is no longer defined by the trauma of the past, but by the quiet, intentional health of its present. The detective, reflecting on this from the distance of his retirement, recognizes that this is the natural, healthy end state of a case that was once thought to be an eternal, unsolvable enigma. The forensic laboratory in the precinct, having long ago transitioned into a cutting-edge facility, now operates as a regional hub, its methodologies serving as the standard for investigations across the state. The detectives who work there today often look back at the Miller file as the origin myth of their department's modern identity. It is a touchstone of their professional ethos, a constant reminder that the most significant technological advancements in the world mean nothing without the foundational, human commitment to the truth. They treat every case, no matter how small or how seemingly insignificant, with the same rigor that was eventually applied to the 1994 disappearance. This is the structural legacy of the case. It elevated the standard of care for every victim in the jurisdiction, ensuring that the cold case is no longer an acceptable conclusion, but an invitation for further innovation and deeper inquiry. The victim's family, meanwhile, has reached a stage of existence that is as enviable as it is rare, a state of life that has moved beyond the shadow of the crime while honoring the memory of the person they lost. They are the quiet, stable pillars of the community, their presence serving as a reminder that resilience is not about the absence of pain, but about the ability to move through it without being consumed. The scholarship fund they established has grown into a significant regional institution, providing resources for countless students who are drawn to the field of criminal justice by the desire to prevent the kind of systemic failure that marked the initial stages of their own ordeal. The detectives who keep in contact with them speak of these encounters with a profound, almost spiritual respect. They know that the family is the heartbeat of the case's resolution, the people whose endurance provided the necessary time for the truth to catch up to the lie. The town itself has become an unexpected academic case study in post-traumatic communal recovery. Sociologists and urban planners have visited Oakwood to understand how a neighborhood, once fractured by a profound, secret betrayal, managed to reknit itself into a cohesive, vigilant unit. They find that the answer isn't in any grand architectural project or sweeping policy change, but in the small, cumulative decisions made by the residents. The decision to be honest about the past, the decision to engage with the uncomfortable truths, and the decision to prioritize the safety and well-being of the collective over the convenience of a quiet, undisturbed status quo. Oakwood is, in the view of these experts, a model of social intelligence, a place that understands that the integrity of a community is only as strong as its willingness to confront its own shadows. In the broader context of the region, the Oakwood investigation catalyzed a more significant, statewide shift in the philosophy of the justice system. The task force that was created in the wake of the conviction has become a permanent feature of the governmental infrastructure, with dedicated funding and a mandate that bridges the gap between law enforcement and historical research. This initiative has led to the resolution of hundreds of other long-dormant cases, bringing answers to thousands of families who had previously resigned themselves to a lifetime of silence. The ripple effect of the 1994 disappearance has thus transcended the physical borders of the suburb, touching lives in ways the initial investigators could never have imagined. Every resolution, every arrest, and every family that finally receives an answer is an indirect, but nonetheless genuine, manifestation of the lessons learned during the arduous process of uncovering the truth in Oakwood. The lead investigator often spends his days corresponding with the detectives who currently hold the positions he once navigated. He is a mentor in the most literal sense, providing not just technical advice, but the kind of perspective that can only be gained through the experience of a long-term, high-stakes investigation. He emphasizes the importance of empathy, the necessity of patience, and the value of keeping the victim at the center of the process, regardless of the years that have passed. He speaks of the long view of justice, the idea that the work they do is a contribution to a historical continuum, a way of ensuring that the law serves not just the needs of the moment, but the fundamental, timeless requirement for truth and accountability. He is, in his own quiet way, continuing to shape the department, ensuring that the hard-won wisdom of the Miller case is passed on, preserved, and practiced by every officer who walks through the station doors. As the years continue to unfold, the story of the 1994 case is gradually receding from the public consciousness, morphing from a recent tragedy into a foundational piece of local history. It is a story that is told with the gravity of a lesson, a reminder of the fragility of the peace that the town currently enjoys. Younger residents, who have no memory of the fear and the confusion of the 90s, still grow up with a sense of the event's significance. They understand that Oakwood is a place that was tested, a place that faltered, but a place that ultimately found its way to a deeper, more resilient kind of truth. This institutional memory is the town's most valuable asset. It is the guarantee that they will never again fall victim to the trap of silence, and that they will never again underestimate the importance of the work required to keep their community whole. In the final, contemplative stillness of the night, as the town sleeps under the vast, unchanging canopy of a Texas sky, there is a profound sense of peace. The houses are dark, the streets are quiet, and the life of the community continues in a steady, rhythmic pulse. The secret that had once polluted the air has been long since scrubbed away, replaced by the clean, bracing air of a reality that is finally, undeniably known. The case of the missing daughter, the tragedy of the Miller family, the confession of the neighbor, and the long, grueling work of the investigation, it has all coalesced into a single, cohesive narrative of human resilience. The nightmare is over, the truth is established, and the community is left with the quiet, expansive realization that they are, at long last, the masters of their own story, living in a light that was earned, one day and one decision at a time. The investigation is not just a success of the past, it is the enduring, living testament to the fact that no truth is ever truly beyond reach, provided there is at least one person who is willing to look for it, and a community that is finally willing to listen. The quiet endurance of Oakwood in the current year, 2026 serves as a living, breathing testament to the profound shift that occurred over 3 decades ago. The community has moved beyond the phase of reconstruction into a state of mature, settled stability, one where the memory of 1994 is not a source of lingering anxiety, but a structural component of their shared civic identity. The neighborhood has seen the natural turnover of generations. Children who were born in the shadow of the revelation are now adults, some of them raising their own families on the very streets where the police once conducted their painstaking, frustrated searches. This generational transition has finalized the process of integration. The victim is no longer just a name on a memorial plaque or a photograph in a history book. She is part of the local lore, a symbol of the neighborhood's commitment to the truth. The garden that occupies the former suspect's lot is now a lush, overgrown sanctuary, its trees providing shade to those who come to sit and reflect. It is a place of profound normalcy, a direct contradiction to the horror that once resided there, and the residents of Oakwood take a quiet, protective pride in that metamorphosis. The forensic laboratory in the precinct continues to function as a center of excellence, a space where the latest in genomic and data-driven analysis is applied to both current and cold cases. The institutional culture of the precinct has been irrevocably altered. The arrogance and bureaucratic inertia that characterized the 90s are entirely gone, replaced by an ethos of radical transparency and continuous professional education. The detectives who walk these halls today do so with a deep respect for the legacy of the Miller investigation. They recognize that their current capabilities, as advanced as they are built upon the ruins of past failures. This perspective fosters a level of humility that is rare in the high-stakes world of law enforcement. They approach every assignment, every witness interview, and every piece of evidence with the knowledge that their predecessors once missed the signs, and that their duty is to be the ones who finally see them. It is a culture of vigilance that respects the gravity of the truth and the fragility of the peace they are tasked with maintaining. The legal system of the region, too, maintains its commitment to the proactive model of justice established by the task force in the aftermath of the conviction. The periodic, mandatory review of every inactive case file is no longer seen as a burdensome administrative task. It is recognized as a fundamental obligation to the citizenry. This policy has become the hallmark of the local justice system, an example that other jurisdictions in the state have sought to emulate. The legal community understands that the Oakwood case proved an essential principle, that the passage of time does not grant immunity. This realization has fundamentally shifted the power dynamic between the predator and the community. It is now widely understood that the shadows can no longer be used as a shield. The legal, scientific, and procedural frameworks are now aligned to ensure that the pursuit of justice is not a matter of luck, but a matter of inevitable, scientific consequence. The family of the victim continues to hold a position of quiet, revered importance within the town. They are the living evidence of the triumph of persistence over oblivion. They have reached a stage where their advocacy is no longer about the struggle for resolution, but about the preservation of the values they fought to protect: transparency, empathy, and the absolute importance of finding the truth, regardless of the years required to uncover it. They are often involved in the mentorship programs of the local schools, speaking to students about the importance of integrity and the power of a community that refuses to be broken by the actions of a few. Their presence is a constant, steadying influence, a reminder that the human spirit is not easily defeated and that love, in its most steadfast form, can ultimately outlast the deepest of deceptions. Sociologically, Oakwood has become a subject of ongoing academic interest, serving as a beacon for communities grappling with their own histories of hidden trauma. Scholars from across the country visit the town to interview residents, study the evolution of their local law enforcement policies, and analyze how the physical environment, specifically the transformation of the suspect's home into a public garden, has facilitated the communal processing of grief. The consensus among these observers is that Oakwood's success lies in its radical refusal to look away. By choosing to confront the reality of their own past, the residents did not merely heal their trauma, they transformed it into an asset of civic resilience. The town is now a model for how a community can take responsibility for its own narrative, ensuring that the dark moments of history do not define them, but serve, instead, as the pillars upon which they build a stronger, more honest identity. In his retirement, the former lead detective maintains a quiet, productive life, often volunteering his time with local nonprofits that work with families of missing persons. He has transitioned into a role of a statesman for the cause of historical accountability. His correspondence with detectives from around the country provides him with a sense of connection to the broader, national shift in the way cold cases are approached. He speaks with the measured, reflective voice of a man who has seen both the worst of human behavior and the most profound capacity for resolution. He remains deeply committed to the idea that the story of the Miller investigation is one that must be understood in its entirety, not just the arrest, but the process, the failure, the breakthrough, and the long, slow work of communal repair. He sees his own life as having been fundamentally shaped by this one singular case, and he is content with the legacy he leaves behind. As Oakwood enters the middle of another year, the town feels solid, vibrant, and entirely self-possessed. The streets are lined with homes that are lived in and loved. The schools are active with the sounds of learning, and the community, interconnected, informed, and profoundly aware of the truth, continues to thrive. There is a sense of completion that hangs over the town, a quiet, resonant understanding that the story of the 1994 disappearance is fully, finally, and rightfully settled. The fear that once gripped the neighborhood has long since dissipated, replaced by a robust, proactive confidence. They are a community that knows who they are, where they have been, and how to defend the peace they have worked so hard to maintain. In the final, contemplative stillness of the day, as the sun dips below the horizon in 2026, the town seems to exist in a state of earned grace. The landscape of the Texas plains remains as vast and indifferent as ever, but the town nestled within it is anything but. It is a place of meaning, a place of truth, and a place where the darkness has been effectively and permanently dispelled by the persistence of the light. The case is a closed file, the verdict is a distant history, and the community, resilient, vigilant, and profoundly human, is ready to look toward the next chapter, secure in the knowledge that they are no longer walking in the dark. They are living in the enduring, illuminating light of the reality they built, a reality that is theirs to hold, to protect, and to pass on to the next generation. The investigation was not just the resolution of a single crime, it was the start of a new way of being, a way of living that honors the truth above all else, ensuring that for the people of Oakwood, the future will always be a place where the shadows have nowhere to hide. The resonance of the Oakwood narrative in the spring of 2026 feels less like a historical echo and more like the rhythmic, steady heartbeat of a town that is fully reconciled with its own shadow. The garden, that lush, enduring sanctuary where the suspect's house once stood, has evolved into a sophisticated, multi-purpose space, a centerpiece for community life that subtly reinforces the values Oakwood now champions: transparency, education, and collective vigilance. On mild afternoons, the space is filled with a cross-section of the town's demographic: retirees discussing the regional shifts, parents supervising their children in the play area, and students from the nearby university conducting field studies on urban sociology and restorative justice. It is no longer just a site of memory. It is a laboratory for communal health. The detective, now settled into the deep tranquility of his retirement, often visits this space, not to dwell on the investigation, but to observe the fruition of the quiet, painstaking work that he and his team initiated decades ago. He sees the town as a living organism that has successfully processed a traumatic infection, emerging not just healed, but strengthened and sensitized to the signs of decay. The precinct's role as a regional leader in forensic innovation has only deepened. In 2026, the department is no longer merely reacting to crimes, but is actively shaping the landscape of public safety through advanced data modeling and community-integrated policing. The detectives of the current era possess a unique professional identity, one that synthesizes the technical rigor of modern data science with the ancient, necessary art of witness engagement. They understand that the Oakwood breakthrough wasn't just a win for forensic science. It was a win for human persistence. When they brief new officers, the narrative of the Miller case is the standard introduction to their philosophy of duty. It serves as a stark reminder that the cold in cold case is a choice, not a fact. This has become the department's institutional manifesto, that every unsolved file is a debt of honor, a promissory note to the victim and their family that will eventually be satisfied, regardless of the time elapsed. The precinct is now a bastion of that conviction, and its success is reflected in the remarkably low incidence of unsolved violent crimes within the district. The family of the victim continues to hold their position as the moral center of Oakwood's narrative. Their evolution from survivors of a profound, unresolved trauma into figures of communal authority is perhaps the most impressive arc in the town's history. They have become the architects of a culture that refuses to let the past define the future, advocating for local and state policies that protect the rights of families in crisis. Their scholarship fund has expanded, now supporting research into non-invasive forensic recovery techniques that allow for the investigation of historical sites without the destruction of the surrounding environment. This commitment to both the truth and the preservation of the community is a perfect reflection of how far they have traveled from the despair of 1994. They are, in every sense, the victors of the Oakwood struggle, not because they won a trial, but because they survived a nightmare and used that survival to make the world a more empathetic and capable place for those who would follow. The legal environment in the state has reached a point of settled, robust integrity. The task force established in the wake of the 1994 resolution has become a permanent, nonpartisan institution, its funding and mandate protected by statute. The procedures for case review are no longer debated. They are a standard, automated component of the justice system's biennial cycle. This legislative stability is the bedrock upon which Oakwood's current peace is built. It ensures that justice is not subject to the whims of political cycles or the limitations of individual investigators' interests. It is a systematic, institutional acknowledgement of the state's obligation to its citizens. This level of bureaucratic accountability, born from the painful, protracted lessons of the Oakwood investigation, is a permanent gift to the region, a promise that the darkness, no matter how skillfully hidden, will never again be allowed to flourish under the shield of neglect. Socially, the town has become a focal point for those interested in the ethics of historical reckoning. Educational forums, held annually in the town's civic center, bring together historians, criminologists, and community leaders to discuss the Oakwood case not as a horror story, but as a framework for societal healing. These discussions delve into the importance of acknowledging the gray areas of history, the danger of collective denial, and the essential role that public memory plays in maintaining the health of a democracy. Oakwood is now a classroom, a place where people come to learn that the path to truth is often long, arduous, and uncomfortable, but that it is the only path that leads to a sustainable, authentic peace. The town's willingness to be that classroom, to be that example, is a final, significant act of communal courage, an acknowledgement that their experience belongs not just to them, but to everyone who seeks to understand the weight of the past. The lead detective often finds himself in dialogue with current investigators, his perspective providing the historical context that helps them make sense of the modern, rapid-fire technological landscape. He tells them that the tools have changed, but the mission is identical, to be the voice for those who can no longer speak. He reminds them that while their datasets are complex and their algorithms are brilliant, the ability to read a human face, to understand a moment of hesitation, and to hold the space for a grieving family to speak their truth are the timeless components of the work. He is an old man now, his hair a bright silver and his movements slower, but his commitment to the integrity of the truth remains as fierce as it was when he first walked into the Miller house. He is the guardian of the narrative, the person who ensures that the lessons of the past are never buried under the convenience of the present. As the months of 2026 continue to unfold, the life of the community remains as vibrant and complex as any other modern town. There are disagreements, challenges, and the occasional disruption of public order, but there is also a profound sense of communal maturity that keeps these issues within the manageable scope of civic life. The residents of Oakwood understand that the safety they enjoy is a fragile, maintained state, something that requires the constant effort of every individual. They are no longer the people they were in the early 90s, naive in their security and blind in their ignorance. They are the people of the resolution, the people who have looked into the darkest possible version of their own reality and chose to move forward with their eyes wide open. Their strength is not an absence of fear, but an awareness of it, coupled with the proven knowledge that they have the power to face whatever comes their way. In the final, contemplative stillness of the day, as the sun begins its slow descent over the plains, the town looks exactly as it always has, a collection of homes, schools, and parks, nestled in the vast, open expanse of the landscape. But the air feels different, thinner, clearer, scrubbed of the secret that had lingered there for so long. It is the air of a place where the truth has been spoken and where the past is finally allowed to be just that, the past. The mystery has been replaced by the quiet, steady reality of a world that is no longer haunted, but entirely, finally, their own. The case of the missing daughter, the tragedy of the Miller family, the confession of the neighbor, and the long, grueling work of the investigation, it has all coalesced into a single, cohesive narrative of human resilience. The nightmare is over, the truth is established, and the community, resilient, vigilant, and profoundly human, is ready to look toward the next chapter, secure in the knowledge that they are no longer walking in the dark. They are living in the enduring, illuminating light of the reality they built, a reality that is theirs to hold, to protect, and to pass on to the next generation. The investigation was not just the resolution of a single crime. It was the start of a new way of being, a way of living that honors the truth above all else, ensuring that for the people of Oakwood, the future will always be a place where the shadows have nowhere to hide. The year 2026 finds Oakwood in a state of tranquil, matured equilibrium, a community that has fully integrated its history into the bedrock of its present. The garden that occupies the former lot of the Miller home has become more than just a public space. It is a profound architectural statement of the town's character, a lush, living, and breathing contradiction to the darkness that once thrived on that soil. The trees, now grown sturdy and deep-rooted, offer a quiet sanctuary to anyone seeking a moment of respite from the frantic pace of the modern world. For the residents of this neighborhood, the space is a testament to the fact that they have successfully reclaimed their identity from the trauma of 1994. It is a place where the victim's name is spoken with the gentle familiarity of an old friend, and where the community's refusal to forget has been translated into an enduring, vibrant testament to the sanctity of life. The lead detective, watching this evolution from his quiet retirement, feels a sense of profound, hard-won peace. He knows that the transformation of that lot was not merely an aesthetic choice, but a spiritual and communal purging that cleared the air for a new, honest chapter of existence. The precinct in 2026 operates as a highly specialized, technically advanced nerve center, but its core philosophy remains anchored to the lessons gleaned from the long, agonizing pursuit of the Oakwood truth. The new generation of detectives, many of whom were barely born when the suspect was finally brought to justice, are mentored in a curriculum that prioritizes the human dimension of forensic analysis. They are taught that while their digital datasets are sophisticated, the true investigator must possess the capacity to listen to the silence of a file, to recognize the importance of long-forgotten details, and to maintain an unrelenting, empathetic commitment to the victims. The precinct is a place of quiet, methodical excellence, a far cry from the overwhelmed, reactive office of the early 90s. It is a monument to the understanding that justice is not an outcome that happens by chance, but a structural integrity that must be maintained through constant vigilance, rigorous investigation, and a deep, systemic respect for the truth. The scholarship fund established by the victim's family has evolved into a nationally recognized powerhouse of forensic education, providing the resources for students who are dedicated to the intersection of justice and public service. These students often visit Oakwood to study the case as a foundational text in the history of criminal investigation. They are the new guard, the men and women who will take the lessons of the Miller investigation, the lessons of persistence, the dangers of institutional bias, and the power of communal resilience, and carry them into the future of their own careers. The family of the victim watches this with a sense of quiet, enduring pride, knowing that their daughter's legacy is no longer just a tragedy, but a permanent, active force for good in the world. They have found a way to bridge the gap between their private grief and the public service they have championed, and in doing so, they have become the moral heart of the community. The regional justice system continues to operate with a level of oversight that is now the hallmark of the state. The mandated, periodic reviews of inactive case files, a policy birthed from the Oakwood experience, have ensured that no victim is ever truly left behind. This system of proactive accountability has turned the regional courts into models of integrity, where every evidence-based possibility is explored and every file is kept open until the truth is identified. This is the structural victory of the Oakwood investigation, the transformation of the state's obligation from a passive, bureaucratic response into a dynamic, relentless commitment to the search for answers. The impact of this shift is measured in the hundreds of cases that have been resolved, the thousands of families who have finally received their answers, and the overall strengthening of the public trust in the mechanisms of the law. Sociologically, Oakwood has become an example of how communities can confront the hidden monsters within their own ranks. Educational forums are held regularly, bringing together experts from various fields to discuss how the Oakwood case can serve as a blueprint for societal healing. They talk about the role of memory, the importance of civic courage, and the way in which the public acknowledgement of a secret can act as a catalyst for a community's renewed, more authentic cohesion. These forums are not just intellectual exercises. They are the living, breathing reality of a town that has embraced its story, warts and all, and chosen to define itself by its resilience rather than its betrayal. Oakwood is, in many ways, the gold standard for how a community can rise above its darkest moments to build something truly lasting. The lead detective often finds himself in conversation with colleagues from across the country, sharing his perspective on how to build a culture of long-term accountability within law enforcement agencies. He emphasizes that the technology is important, but the culture is essential. He tells them that the most vital tool in any investigator's kit is the ability to maintain hope when the trail has gone cold, and to hold on to the belief that the truth is always there, waiting to be found, provided the investigators have the humility to look for it, the patience to wait for it, and the courage to act upon it when it finally reveals itself. He has become a legend in his own right, a figure of steady, quiet authority whose career is a testament to the idea that one person, one investigation, and one steadfast commitment to the truth can, in fact, change the trajectory of an entire history. As 2026 moves forward, the life of the community remains as vibrant, varied, and human as it has always been. There are the usual complexities of modern life, the challenges of governance, the strains of economic change, the personal issues of the residents, but there is an underlying current of communal maturity that keeps everything in perspective. The people of Oakwood are not naive. They are grounded. They know the darkness exists, but they also know they have the strength to manage it. They are no longer the people who are afraid to look at the truth because they were too comfortable in their own silence. They are the people who have proven, through their own shared experience, that the truth is the most powerful weapon they possess in the defense of their own peace. In the final, contemplative stillness of the day, as the sun begins its slow, golden descent over the wide expanse of the plains, the town looks as it always has, a peaceful, ordered, and enduring landscape of homes, streets, and human connections. But the air feels different, thinner, clearer, scrubbed of the secret that had lingered there for so long. It is the air of a place where the truth has been spoken, where the past is finally allowed to be just that, the past, and where the community, resilient, vigilant, and profoundly human, is ready to look toward the next chapter, secure in the knowledge that they are no longer walking in the dark. They are living in the enduring, illuminating light of the reality they built, a reality that is theirs to hold, to protect, and to pass on to the next generation. The investigation was not just the resolution of a single crime. It was the start of a new way of being, a way of living that honors the truth above all else, ensuring that for the people of Oakwood, the future will always be a place where the shadows have nowhere to hide. The final chapter of this long, arduous saga in Oakwood does not conclude with the dramatic flair of a courtroom verdict, but with the quiet, profound settling of a community that has finally found its own rhythm. In the year 2026, Oakwood is no longer a town defined by the specter of 1994, but a place that has masterfully integrated its history into the bedrock of its character. The garden that once served as a scar on the neighborhood landscape has matured into a lush, perennial testament to communal resilience, its roots tangled deep within soil that was once the silent witness to a tragedy. For the residents, this space is not a tomb, but a sanctuary, a vibrant, living piece of the community that serves as a constant reminder that the truth, no matter how long it takes to emerge, is the only foundation upon which a genuine, honest life can be constructed. The lead detective, now long retired and living in the quiet twilight of his years, often walks through this garden on brisk, clear mornings, his presence a silent nod to the conclusion of the journey that once consumed every waking hour of his life. He doesn't look at the space with the critical, clinical eye of an investigator anymore, but with the gentle, reflective gaze of a man who knows that he helped provide the final, necessary piece of the town's salvation. The precinct in 2026 is a bastion of sophisticated, empathetic policing, its institutional culture permanently colored by the lessons of the Miller investigation. The younger detectives who operate here are not just technicians. They are custodians of the community's trust, their work guided by the hard-won realization that a case is never cold. It is simply waiting for a mind that is stubborn enough and a heart that is committed enough to find the path forward. They have inherited a legacy where the pursuit of truth is not merely a job requirement, but a profound, moral duty to the residents they serve. The precinct hums with the activity of a unit that understands the high cost of silence and the transformative power of being heard. Every piece of evidence they collect, every witness they engage, and every case they work is filtered through the collective wisdom of their history, ensuring that the mistakes of the 90s are never again repeated. They are the guardians of a standard that Oakwood demanded, and they uphold it with a professional, quiet grace that honors the memory of the past while remaining resolutely focused on the challenges of the future. The victim's family, who emerged from the decades of uncertainty not just as survivors, but as the moral architects of the town's rebirth, continue to serve as the North Star of the community's resilience. Their scholarship fund has achieved a level of national influence that serves as an enduring, active force for good, supporting researchers and students who approach the study of criminal justice with the dual requirements of scientific rigor and humanistic inquiry. They have become the definitive voices for victims' rights across the state, their testimonies carrying the weight of their own experience and the authority of their own recovery. They have succeeded in creating a legacy that ensures their daughter's name is synonymous not with the circumstances of her disappearance, but with the hope, education, and light that she has brought to thousands of others. This is their ultimate triumph, that they have transformed their private, agonizing loss into a public, lasting gain. Legally and judicially, the state has fully matured into a framework that prioritizes the proactive, ongoing investigation of all unsolved cases. The Regional Task Force, born from the urgent, necessary lessons of the Oakwood Resolution, continues to function as an essential pillar of the governmental infrastructure. The precedent established during the trial, the necessity of forensic genealogy, and the mandate for periodic, systemic case review is now so deeply ingrained in the legal code that it is the standard against which all other jurisdictions are measured. This is the structural victory that Oakwood bequeathed to the wider world, the absolute certainty that the law will not abandon those who have been wronged, and that time will never be an acceptable alibi for the perpetrator. The system has learned to be patient, meticulous, and, above all, relentless, ensuring that the shadows are no longer a sanctuary for anyone. The sociological impact of the Oakwood experience remains a subject of profound interest as the town continues to be a living, breathing model for how to navigate the aftermath of a secret betrayal. The annual educational forums continue to draw thousands of participants, all eager to learn the mechanics of the town's communal repair. What they find is not a simple formula, but a human truth, that the path to a sustainable community is found in the willingness to acknowledge the uncomfortable, to listen to the difficult stories, and to invest in the radical idea that the truth is always better than the silence. Oakwood has demonstrated that a town can be defined by its courage, its empathy, and its absolute refusal to allow the dark moments of history to become the final word on who they are. The lead detective often finds himself in correspondence with his former colleagues, as well as the new generation of investigators who seek his counsel. He does not offer them shortcuts or easy answers. He speaks to them of the long, slow work of the truth, the necessity of keeping the faith in the dark, the importance of maintaining an open, inquisitive mind, and the profound, life-affirming satisfaction of closing a file that once seemed impossible to solve. He is the repository of a history that is no longer a haunting, but a lesson. He speaks with the cadence of a man who has traveled a great distance, not just through the landscape of the Texas plains, but through the difficult terrain of his own conscience, eventually arriving at a place of complete, unshakable peace. He has done his part, he has left the town in capable hands, and he is fully, finally, ready to step back and let the story continue under its own, steady and resilient momentum. As the days turn into weeks in the late spring of 2026, the town continues its life, a life of activity, of growth, of challenges, and of joy. It is a life that is fundamentally marked by the knowledge that the worst has been faced and survived. The residents of Oakwood move through their days with a certain, quiet wisdom, an awareness of the world's complexities that doesn't hinder their ability to appreciate the beauty of their ordinary, daily existence. They are a community that knows the price of their tranquility, and they are committed to paying it with a level of vigilance and care that is entirely their own. The investigation, the trial, the search for the victim, and the long, agonizing wait for the truth, these are all parts of the story that now belong to the town's history, and they have been processed, learned from, and most importantly, integrated into a future that is finally, truly free. In the final, contemplative moments of this long, resonant narrative, one can look at Oakwood and see the absolute, beautiful clarity of a world that is no longer held captive by the secrets of the past. The landscape, the rolling plains, the quiet streets, the sturdy houses, remains, but the spirit of the place is entirely changed. It is the spirit of a community that has emerged from the long, cold night of an unsolved crime into the enduring, illuminating light of a reality that is finally, fully known. The story had a painful, dark beginning, a grueling and uncertain middle, but it has arrived at a final, necessary end, an end that is not a stopping point, but the quiet, resonant start of a reality that belongs to the residents of Oakwood, a reality that they have earned with their courage, their commitment, and their unwavering refusal to let the shadows have the final word. The case is closed, the file is set in its rightful place in the archive, and the world, vast, unpredictable, and finally quiet, continues its steady, inevitable rotation into the future, a future where the truth is no longer a hidden, haunting specter, but the solid, dependable ground beneath their feet.